are live. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Lunch and Learn. The amazing Lunch and Learn audience have returned after a couple of weeks break, and we are back on and ready to go. And for those who might be new to Lunch and Learn, we can't see or hear you, Mark, but welcome if you have intended to join us for this. We are going to talk for a minute about the Parsha. We're going to talk for a minute, I was thinking, also about Yom HaShoah, and then we'll dive into Pirkei Avot. So just a quick thing about this week's Parsha. This week's Parsha is Shmini. Parshat Shmini, the third Parsha in the book of Vayikra, and the story starts at the end of the 7-day inauguration period for the Kohanim. They've been had a week of training to get themselves ready for service in the tabernacle, in the Mishkan, and latterly in the temple. Hello, Joe.
Hello.
Well, welcome to the show. So we start off this week's parasha on the 8th day of that 7-day inauguration period. So this is the day when life with the Mishkan, temple service, that's when it starts. The Kohanim get to work at the beginning of this week's parasha. So we see actually immediately that two people get it a bit wrong. Aaron HaKohen had 4 sons who worked with him. And unfortunately, we read early on in this week's parasha of the death of Nadav and Avihu, 2 of his sons, because they, without going into all of the details of the various interpretations of what their mistake was, there was some kind of mistake that happened in their work in the Mishkan. And as a result of that, they lose their lives in this week's parasha. So loads to say on that, but beyond the scope of our brief summary. Hello, Abby. We read about, therefore, the commandment that Kohanim should not be working in active service in a state of intoxication. We're going to come back to that one in a minute. And then in the main, the rest of the parasha is about the laws of kashrut. So the different signs and signals that we are looking for with animals and species of birds and the creepy crawlies and all of that, what's permitted and what is forbidden. That all appears towards the end of this week's parasha. And I was just reading a very interesting idea. There's a concept beyond the fact that the Torah tells us the things that we can and that we cannot eat. There's a lot of material out there that talk about why we have the laws of kashrut. Why does God care what we eat? Why does he not care what we eat? And there's lots to say on the subject and lots of amazing insights, lots of amazing divrei Torah, and all the rest of it. Spiritually, we talk about how we are what we eat. The things that we put in our mouths leave certain spiritual residue, and they leave certain spiritual side effects. So, for example, in the context of predatory birds, we talk a lot about how, the reason or one of the reasons why Hashem tells us not to eat predatory birds is because we do not want to have the spiritual side effect of ingesting that kind of cruelty, because it has an effect on our souls and that will have an effect on our actions. So, there's a lot of people who historically would have said, well, now that animals can be processed in very sterile environments and everything's much cleaner and more hygienic, surely the rules of kashrut are obsolete. But it's not about physical cleanliness. It's not about physical health reasons that Hashem would necessarily say that this is permitted or this is forbidden. It goes deeper than that. We're taught that there is a spiritual side effect, that when you bring something into your body what you are doing is you are at the same time ingesting the spiritual characteristics of those different animals and those different creatures. And so the insight that I saw today was that if we have difficulty understanding that, there is perhaps a reason why the very commandment that comes before the rules of kashrut is the rules of not serving in the temple when intoxicated. And it's one and the same idea, and perhaps that is why it comes immediately before the rules of kashrut, because we have no problem understanding that when you consume too much alcohol, it will have an impact on the way in which you're able to act and the way in which you're able to react. We know what the physical side effects are of having too much to drink. And perhaps then, thematically, that commandment comes right before the laws of kashrut, because even though we don't necessarily see physical side effects from eating particular kinds of food, there is nonetheless a spiritual side effect that does have an impact on our soul. So I thought that was quite interesting and quite fascinating. So that is a little bit on this week's parasha, Parashat Shmini. I'm interested to see if people have anything to say about Yom HaShoah, but I came across this post from a Israeli journalist called Sivan Rahav Meir, and I thought I would just share it with you, just because it kind of also captured my attention today. She was talking about how there's, you get bombarded from all over the place on social media today with different posts, pictures, memories, stories, and she says, we are getting saturated with stories, memories, and tears. But in my opinion, we must not neglect cold, hard, dry facts. Here is a list of them courtesy of Professor Yosef Ben Shlomo. I'm not sure who he is. 6 historical facts that we need to internalize in order to understand why the Holocaust was such an extraordinarily unique event. So she lists these 6, and I think it pays for us to hear these and reflect on them. Number 1 is Judenrein. For the first time in history, other than Haman's plot against the Jews in ancient Persia, one nation sought the complete elimination of another, despite the fact that the vast majority of the nation targeted for extermination lived outside the territory of the aggressor nation. The goal was not to just put the other nation into exile, but to erase it from the face of the earth. In Nazi documents on the number of Jews destined for death, the tiny Albanian Jewish community of 200 souls was noted. Number 2, the absence of opposition. In the Wannsee Conference of January 1942, the final solution was unanimously approved by the 15 attendees, all of whom held high-ranking ministerial positions in the German government, and 8 of whom were holders of doctorate degrees. Number 3, the Germans worked against their own interests in World War II. Even as Germany was losing the war, it behaved irrationally. Instead of investing in just fighting enemy forces, the Germans continued to waste energy on their Jewish extermination project. Number 4, they were not crazy. Among the murderers were family men and women, professionals and intellectuals. They were perfectly sane. Millions of ordinary, regular folks did not see any problem with taking part in this giant extermination project. Number 5, the concentration camps were not bombed. The death factories continued to operate without interference by the Western Allied nations or their armies, even while the Allies regularly bombed Nazi munitions factories. Number 6, there was no way out. Unlike their ability to cope with other horrendous decrees and persecutions throughout history, the Jews of Europe had no way out. There was no possibility of saving themselves through cooperation with the enemy, or by being exiled, or by conversion to another faith. Death was their only option. She says at the end, today we face Holocaust denial, ignorance, and forgetfulness, as well as claims that the Holocaust was not a unique or particularly anti-Jewish event. It is therefore more important than ever not only to remember what happened, but to make a commitment to never forget. So I thought I would share all of that. That was Rita's got her thumb up there. You know, we'll be hearing a lot. We'll be hearing a lot later, but I thought it paid for us to take a moment just to reflect on the day. I've always had a challenge with the strapline of never forget, because I think that there has to be something that accompanies that as well. Never forgetting is one kind of element to this, but beyond that, there has to be, you know, more outreach with regards to making sure that others don't forget as well. I think if we come away each year on this Yom HaShoah day with just the feeling of, okay, that's another year where I've not forgotten, well done me, I think that we miss the essence of what's at play. I used to do Holocaust education seminars in schools in the Northwest, non-Jewish schools in the Northwest, and you know, you can see the parts that are taught on the curriculum and the parts where they have absolutely no idea. And there is so much people in this country and the whole world are just poorly educated and don't really understand the magnitude of what we are trying to A, remember, and B, ensure never happens again. And I've seen it with my own eyes. They know certain fundamental things, but they don't make any emotional connection to it. And so there's pardon?
Can I just make a couple of observations?
Please.
To what you're saying. One is, I don't think it's ever been satisfactorily explained how one man could instill in others and millions of people this sort of nastiness, and how it arose and perpetuated, and obviously nobody did anything. So I don't think it's been explained. The second thing is, I'll come back to your point, and I don't think you can beat a Holocaust survivor sitting in front of a young class of children or young adults and explaining what happened to them, because you can see the kids are absolutely riveted, some horrified by the explanations that these people take them through. So I tend to agree with you. You can't beat sitting down with a class in a school and take them through it, because I think mostly they don't believe it until they hear it.
Yeah.
But how we continue with this, because obviously most of the survivors are now coming to that age. So I agree with you on that.
Can I say something too?
Please.
Yeah, what I feel as well, I mean, I'm looking at the news every night, and Myanmar, you know, come out, shooting just at random, you know, civilians and everything else. So we haven't really learned much about World War II. It still carries on.
Yeah.
I mean, we're standing there watching it on TV. Funny enough, Peter and I, we've been to they're amazing people, amazing country. But that's beside the point. And suddenly they've been taken over by the army, and these poor people don't know what's going on, and they just get shooted at, you know, for not agreeing what's happening. So we haven't really learned much about about the two world wars, really.
Yeah, I would agree with you. It boggles the mind.
May I?
Please.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi everyone. I think there's two parallel strands there. One, it's about education, which was something you referred to, Rabbi Nick. I have a similar experience where some of what I do each year revolves around mentioning medical experimentation, and no one ever knows about it. No one's ever heard of it. So it's about continual education. But I think what we're doing really well at the moment as a community is supporting the Uyghurs and the Uyghur campaign, because there was that presentation through the shore recently. So it's about learning, but it's about supporting those who also have similar struggles. That's one thing. And the parallel strand is about recognising the continuing anti-Semitism and calling it out. And by continually calling it out, we have an increased awareness, and in doing so, we need to make sure that something like this never happens again. So 2 parallel strands, you know, that's what I think.
Thank you. Joy, you had your hand up as well.
Yes, I just wanted to share a few nice experiences. I used to be involved with an organisation that took classes of non-Jewish children who were doing, I think, Bible studies, they called it, up for GCSE. And they used to come to London for the day. And we used to take them to Edgware. No, not Edgware. Yes, Edgware. Golders Green, apologies. And various Jewish shops, and show them the Jerusalem Gold, I think one of those, and to the delis. And we used to take them to lunch, and so they could feel it. And then what we actually did was the coach used to go to Kinloss, and there we took them into the shul. We showed them the Aram Kodesh. We had someone who could come out and take the scrolls out, and they could see them. And we had a talk. This was the best thing. We had a talk, about 30, 40, 50 kids all sitting there, totally non-Jewish, probably never met a Jewish person in their life before. And survivors would talk about their experiences. And these young 13, 14 kids who'd probably been looking around and quite enjoyed their lunch and were on their phone, you know, all that. They were mesmerised by these wonderful people, and you could see the tears. It was quite amazing. So yes, I just want to show it. That illustrates what we've all been saying.
Thank you, Joy. The immersive experiences is really one of the best ways we have available to us of emotionally connecting to it. Yeah, when I used to do these seminars, the beginning chunk of it was always to try and humanize the Holocaust, and, you know, go beyond statistics and try and paint a picture of the fact that these were actual people with families and normal, contributing to society, and that was all taken away. And it was taken away, you know, in a completely, you know, Peter was saying before, like, how could everyone have got so swept up in it? It happened right under everyone's noses, essentially. It wasn't, you know, there were no secrets. Yeah, Joe.
I don't know if any of you saw the news on BBC this morning. They had a Holocaust survivor and the director of March of the Living, and they were pairing up these Holocaust survivors with personalities. Now this one, she'd met Ronnie O'Sullivan, spent time with him, and he's a man of 40, well-travelled, you know, everything else, experienced, and he did not know about the Holocaust, and she said he didn't stop asking questions, and he was very moved. Yes, because he met her, a person, individual, you know, one-to-one.
The snooker player.
And yeah.
Had never heard about the Holocaust.
Yeah, but he heard about the Holocaust, but he didn't know the extent of the human thing and what proved. He didn't know that. And he was asking a lot of questions. She said it was fascinating. He was absolutely riveted. He just did not understand the depth of it.
Amazing that they could
just showed you, yeah.
I mean, there are videos, they're shocking videos of you know, illuminated college campuses in America where people stand on the street and they just, you know, pull people over just to ask them a couple of questions. Do you know who Adolf Hitler was? Do you know when he lived? Do you know what he did? Have you ever heard of Auschwitz? They don't know anything. These are people with college educations and they do not know anything. Martin?
Just for my penny's worth, I think one of the, what I did realise, but what amazing is that professor you just spoke about, that this was the first time in history when a country and a leader wanted to get rid of an entire group of people, even though they weren't within their own borders. Before, that's happening, it's awful what's happening in China, what's happening in Burma, and what happens in Russia and other places, but they're trying to get rid of people or attitude within their own country. But here we, as that person pointed out, one of the most important things that we have to point out to these children is not the individual terror that went on with those people in the camps, but that this person, this country, wanted to obliterate all the Jews all over the world, even though they had no effect and no in Germany itself. And it very poignant. That it's something I hadn't thought about, that how unique this was.
And even if they weren't Jewish, if they had at one point a Jewish relative.
Yeah, 1/4 grandparent. Unbelievable. It hadn't entered my head, actually, till you mentioned it, that how unique this was. You know, we had a sort of Holocaust here in England at one point, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, but all they wanted to do was get rid of the Jews of England. They didn't care about the Jews in Germany or the Jews in America or anywhere else. It's quite, disturbing that I hadn't thought of that, how unique that was.
Well, I appreciate you bringing that to the table, Martin. It's amazing. Shekoyach. Okay, with the little bit of time that we have left, ladies and gentlemen, let's have a go at some of the Pirkei Avot. I'm not sure we'll get 2 in today, but just out of interest, can everyone see that on the screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Does that look easier to follow?
Yeah.
Oh, that's
Oh,
great.
it's in a different format.
It is.
Hebrew and English. Yeah.
It's side by side. I realised just last night that I can change the way in which it gets presented. So if that's easier, then I'll keep it like that. So who wants to read for us number 18 on the screen, and in our books probably 23?
Yeah, how's that? 23 in mine.
We just it makes it up as it goes along on this website, I tell you. Who wants to take us through it?
I'll do it.
Thank
I
you.
like reading out loud.
Thank you. Were you like that as a student in school as well?
Yes. And I like performing and talking to people. So.
I used to get so frustrated as a sixth form A-level English student when we'd be reading whatever it was, Shakespeare, for example, and there'd be people sitting there reading like, Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo? I'll be like, oh, put some emotion into it, please.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, Joy, well, with full flair, take us through number 18.
Yeah. Well, I think I've put my glasses on. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar said, do not try to appease your friend during his hour of anger, nor comfort him at the hour while his death still lies before him, nor question him at the hour of his vow, nor strive to see him in the hour of his disgrace. Oh.
Thank you very much. Let's take a moment for everyone to gather their thoughts.
I agree with the first 3, but I think the last one is a bit harsh, because that possibly is when someone needs friendship.
Ah, okay. So
somebody in the hour of this.
So when you read this and you see lir'oto, to see, you mean to literally encounter him. That's where your brain went to first off.
Yeah, I can see you can't. Somebody who's just lost a person, don't try and comfort them, but don't try and say, oh, well, this is life or whatever. People, if somebody's hit a bad place, they've done something they shouldn't, then I think that is the time to put your arm around them and say, look, there's a future, there's a life ahead. You need comforting. That would be the most important thing to do.
Yes, I would 100% agree with you. And just in defense of Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, who's not around, obviously, to defend himself, I don't think he's saying that people who care shouldn't see someone in the hour of their disgrace. I think I think the sentiment is, don't try and enjoy it. Don't try and relish while others are in a time of disgrace. Yeah. So I can certainly see why the literal meaning of the word would make it sound like we shouldn't be trying to help people, but the nuance of what he's saying is more along the lines of not to enjoy people's downfall.
Oh, right, that's a different thing.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you.
Sorry.
I
No.
felt uncomfortable when it said, "No comfort him at the hour while his dead still lies before him," because you immediately feel that if someone's lost someone and you're with them or something like that, you would want to. But I think it's a degree of closeness to the person that you would be comforting. So it's a stranger, he's saying.
Hmm.
Rabbi, is the word disgrace a good translation?
Is what, sorry?
Is the word disgrace a good translation? What does it mean?
So the Hebrew word there, that last word at the bottom line, is kalkalato, and disgrace is certainly one of the layers of translating kalkalato.
It's humiliation, isn't it? Really?
Yeah,
Somebody
there's
who's humiliated.
kilkul also has connotations of being wiped out, almost destroyed, disgraced, fallen,
Humiliated.
yeah, those are all aspects of it. Joe, you have your hand up?
Yes, I agree with all the statements, particularly the death one, because when you have high emotion and you're very upset, you're not listening. Words don't mean anything. You have to leave people. Even with the last one that Martin didn't like, I agree with, because it's his hour of his disgrace, and it's his dignity. It's like they don't like people around. You wouldn't want someone that he has to come to terms with what he's done himself and feel a bit calmer about it and think what he's going to do about it. You have to leave them. I think just show you're there, but I don't think words, whatever words you say, are going to make any difference to a person that's very emotional. You have to let them calm down a little and come to terms with whatever it is.
Absolutely.
The bit about not comforting somebody who's got the dead before, I think what he's saying is don't try and be joy, don't try and make it better. You can comfort him, but don't try and bring him out of it, because you can't, or her. And even the disgrace could be a her, ma'am.
Yeah. I mean, my cousin in America, she's 84, just died of COVID. And the cousin here that's closest to her is distraught. It was her sister-in-law. And she rang to tell me and was crying. I said nothing. I just said, Shirley, there's nothing I can say. There's nothing you can say.
Yeah, but you can comfort her. You can be there for her. You can be there for her.
She's grateful I rang, and I ring every couple of days to see how she is. But, she was just up there. When she got the news, she rang me and she was distraught. So there's nothing. I just said there's nothing I can say.
But that's what this mission is saying, isn't it? Don't try and say, oh, it'll be all right.
Yeah.
Because it won't be right.
That's what the mission is saying. You did exactly the right thing according to this mission.
Yeah. I'm sure we've all heard stories when people have been sitting shivering or been at the funeral or whatever it is, and someone's come up and just said the daftest thing, that they're coming from a good place.
Yeah.
They're trying to help, trying to make you feel better, trying to give you comfort, but it's just completely the wrong time.
I once was at a shiver where there, unfortunately, was a young man of 11 sitting shiver for his father, and somebody went up and said, "Oh, now you've got responsibility for this house now."
Oh,
what a terrible thing to say to an 11-year-old.
Yeah.
I mean, he meant it in the best way. He didn't mean to hurt, but it was so putting the fear into this young boy that he was now responsible.
Yeah, and you get people going up to people at shivers and they'll say something like, "Oh, still, it could be worse. It could have been blah 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 blah." I'm like, oh.
I tell you, the wonderful thing. A friend of mine lost his father while he was on. The father was on holiday, and it was on the last day that he unfortunately had a heart attack. And somebody said to them, "Well, at least he had the benefit of the holiday."
So that is who Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar is talking to. It's worth pointing out that he was known as a very sensitive rabbi. He he understood people in that way. Had a very extremely in tune with sensitivity, with human nature. The Talmud teaches about how that there's a statement by this rabbi, by Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, who's in the last generation of the Mishnah, couple of hundred years into AD, and he said that there are three things that one has to keep at a distance and has to be sensitive to, and he says that we have to be sensitive to our passions, to our sexual drive. That this is something that can't be crushed completely, but it has to be directed into the right channels. And he says that children and women have to be treated appropriately and sensitively. And in particular with children, he says that, excessive pressure on a child will be detrimental. Tyrannical pressure on people is detrimental. One has to go about these kinds of relationships and these kinds of connections in a very sensitive way. So that the fact that statement is coming from him, the fact that his Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, which, as we've said before, is like his motto for life, this is, I guess, where his neshama would shine when he was giving his sermons and his Divrei Torah and writing in his Forum magazine and whatever outlets he has to be able to share the thoughts that are deepest to him. That was what he connected to. And he didn't. There's another story about him, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, that he once. He had a rude awakening to this sensitivity. The story says that he went to a particular town, and he bumped into this person who apparently was extremely ugly, and he said, "Is everyone in this town as ugly as you?" And he said, well, don't ask me, ask the craftsman who made me. So whatever the layers of that story means, whether he literally asked this question to somebody ugly, or whether there's deeper layers to this to the symbolism of this story, nonetheless, he is remembered, and he was known for his sensitive attitude. And so if we look at his message over here, and we pay attention to what he's saying, he says, do not try to appease your friend during his hour of anger. At the time when you are caught up, as we were saying, you're in the heat of the moment, you're in the heat of these emotions of anger, of grief, of anguish, whatever it is that the person is feeling. And we know how these kinds of emotions can completely take over a person at the time when they're at their most acute. So he's saying it's better to keep your distance. It's better to stay away. We know that if you say the wrong thing at a funeral or a shiva, then that's a memory that stays with them forever. My dad doesn't drink alcohol because when he was a kid, and unfortunately my grandfather died when my father was only young, they gave him brandy after the levaya, and he felt sick from it. They were trying to stip up a lip or whatever, and it had a terrible reaction for him, so much so that he's never had a positive association with alcohol. So we just never know what our actions, what kind of impact they're going to have. We're trying to be helpful, but we have to come from a sensitive place. We all intuitively understand this. We all know this, and we've all unfortunately seen examples where people get it wrong, and you just think like, how callous, how insensitive, how oblivious, how spatially unaware could you possibly be to have tried to think that you were making it better. But it's human nature, isn't it? We all want to try and say something, and we find it uncomfortable to be sitting in silence. We might not realize this actually, but when a person is sitting shiva, and we go to visit them, we're not supposed to initiate a conversation. We're supposed to sit and patiently wait until the person sitting Shiva actually opens up and starts to talk. The opportunity for Shiva is there for the mourners to be able to start to come to terms with their grief. People often remark when they lose a relative that, if they just kept themselves to themselves, and unfortunately because of COVID, that's the experience that a lot of people have had. But if a person is locked away from the world, then it delays the ability for a person to start opening up and coming to terms with the loss. But the fact that we halachically mandate for a person to be in the public eye in those immediate days after suffering a bereavement, what it actually is supposed to encourage is the process of emotion, and to know that you have people who are supporting you and people who are around you to help you get through it, so that you're not on your own and you're not isolated. And as I said, that's been one of the hardest things for people who have suffered bereavement, is that they haven't had that opportunity. But what's intriguing is you sometimes see people thinking that they've done wrong by the person who has passed by not being able to sit Shiva. But really, the process of Shiva is there for the mourner. And it's not about what they're doing for the deceased. It's about what other people can do for a person going through bereavement. So yeah, that's very much the thrust and the angle from which Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar is coming from. A person who is angry is not going to be calmed down, especially not by you going, calm down. It's very hard when a person gets into arguments, when a person gets into fights. You want nothing more than to just say, like, okay, are we all right now? I've apologized. Yeah, we're good. But sometimes people need to cool off. People need to get themselves back on track, because anger can really take over a person's mental space. So we need to allow people to cool down. We need to allow people to cope with their grieving in their own way. So and then the final thing, this is amazing. One of the insights to this. So on one level, to not go to the effort of seeing someone at the time of their downfall, at the time of their disgrace. So on the one hand, we shouldn't rejoice when other people are suffering, or someone that we don't like, and we're like, oh, they had that coming, didn't they? We need to avoid those kinds of emotions and taking advantage of those situations. But on another level as well, there's an attitude that Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar is trying to reveal and emerge over here, which is that even someone who is being punished by God, even if they are a really bad person and they deserve their punishment and they've got what's coming to them, so we still have to give privacy, respect and sensitivity, even though it would be clear that this person is thoroughly deserving of punishment. The example, actually, I didn't write it down in my notes, but if I recall correctly, in the book that I was reading, that was written by Beryl Wine, he was saying you could even have, let me just make sense, even the justified punishment of Nazi war criminals, as though any human punishment can ever be sufficient, brings no joy. Am I reading the right one? Oh no, this is next week's. Whoops. Spoiler alert. Yeah, that's more appropriate for next week. Oh no, it does. It says over here as well. Sorry, let me just go over what his words are here. The Torah is very sensitive towards a human being's sense of shame. Since humans are representative of their creator, shaming a human being is tantamount to an affront to the creator. Therefore, one should avoid gloating at another's downfall, a lesson that the next Mishnah emphasizes. There you go, that was our spoiler alert. Here, Rabbi Shimon warns us not to attempt to witness one's downfall and punishment. Even those who are punished by God or the court are entitled to privacy. And then he actually says, I do not feel that this rule applies to extraordinary circumstances, such as the Nuremberg trials of the Nazi criminals. Rather, it applies to the failures, losses, and even punishments of ordinary humans that occur in the regular course of our lives. In all events, one must respect another person's privacy and be sensitive to his pain and his failure. And somewhere else, it says that if you go through the story of Bereshit, at the moment when Adam and Eve make their mistake with the tree of knowledge, so it says that Hashem waits for them to cover themselves up before he addresses what they got wrong. And they tie this into what our missionary is saying over here, that he wanted to minimize their shame and bring about a bit of an opportunity for some level of correction and composure before he then took the opportunity to address them. So it's a very interesting insight because it is. Joy. Oh no, Rita, I'm sorry. Can we go to Rita first? Because she was putting her hand up a while back.
Sorry, I just want to ask a question. When did Shiva come into, because it might be in those days we didn't have Shiva, do we?
No, it was. It's codified in halacha. It's goes way back.
Is it the word of mouth? People, is that the Torah where it's not written?
Yes, I don't think it's written in the Torah. Thou shalt sit shiva. But the mourning process is certainly crops up a few times in the Torah.
Maybe in those days, the Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, there was no Shiva.
No, there will have been, and there would have been Shloshim as well.
Absolutely.
That the concepts appear in different instances in the Tanakh, even if it's not explicitly written as a commandment of how we go about doing it. The process was in play, very much so. Yeah. So, Joy.
I'd like to ask two things. The part where it says no question him at the hour of his vow.
Oh yes, I forgot that one. Thank you.
I'm a little bit uncertain. And is there any reason, or do you think there's any importance in the order in which he talks about it? So anger and bereavement and taking a vow and disgrace. Do you think that has anything to do? But I'm curious about the vow.
Yes. So I apologise. I skipped over the vow. I'll come back to that one. In answer to your second question first, I'm sure there will be connections. I'm sure that will be discussed somewhere, but I didn't come across anything when I was preparing and researching. But yes, I'm sure there will be some kind of perhaps build up or whatever it might be. And that's very astute to realise that would probably be the case. So thank you for that. In answer to your first question, nor question him at the hour of his vow. So let's just take a look at the Hebrew. Va'al tishal lo bishat nidro. So a neder, the nedarim, which is the term for the promises and the oaths and the vows that people make, is a topic of Jewish law, which is actually extremely significant, but not often considered and thought about. We know that we get together once a year on Yom Kippur and we say Kol Nidrei. That's the same word. And neder are the promises and the vows that a person may make, and there's a process and a significance to vows that people make, and there's also halakhically a whole process of breaking these vows, annulling these vows, cancelling these vows. So there's tractates of Mishnah and Gemara and Talmud and Halacha, and it's all dedicated to this area of law. So fundamentally, what he is saying is that you can have a situation where a person in the heat of the moment makes a particular vow that they swear that they're never going to go near that person again. They swear they're never going to touch that again, never going to do this again, never going to do that again. And there is a process of being able to break those vows, annul those vows in the immediate aftermath. But you kind of really only get one shot at that. So if the dayanim, if the rabbis in question are able to steer the person to the realization that if they had understood the true ramification of their vow, then they would have never made the vow, then there becomes an opportunity to be able to break it. Right? You have the opportunity for the dayanim to cancel it, to annul it. So you get this one shot, right, to steer the person to the realization that they hadn't understood the true implication and the true ramification of the vow that they had made. So let's say a husband and wife have an argument, and in the heat of the argument, one of them turns around to the other and says, I swear I never want anything to do with you again. So hang on a minute, you've just made a vow. There's a halachic activation that you have just achieved with your words. This is no laughing matter. And it could be that halachically they are no longer allowed to have any benefit from each other ever again because of this vow. That's how significant it can be. So what you do is you calm down first, and then you have someone, steer the process to make you realize that if you'd have understood that you were making this vow and it was going to forbid you to any kind of contact to this individual for the rest of time, you'd have never made that vow. Are you silly? You'd have never made that vow. In which case there becomes an opening to break the vow, because you didn't understand what you were doing when you made the vow. So if you get that wrong, if you go too soon and say, are you really sure that you meant that? Then what's going to happen is they'll be like, yeah, 100%, never want anything to do with them again. And then you may have lost that opportunity. So when he's saying to, what was it? Nor question him at the hour of his vow, when the emotion is raw, when you're in the heat of the moment, that is not the time to start trying to orchestrate the right conditions to annul the vow, because they're still going to be in that headspace. They're still going to be in that heated, emotional moment that they were going through when they made the vow in the first place. So it's again another point about trying to make situations better at a time when it's not going to be constructive and it's not actually going to help. So first they would have to calm down so that they could then realize that they would have never said the things that they had said if they'd really understood the ramifications. I remember listening to a class some time ago from an amazing public speaker in America called Charlie Harari, who I am desperate to try and bring to Bushy in some way, shape or form. He is absolutely sensational. And he said that, we don't appreciate this, but as Jews, we have the power to zap things and change their halachic reality with our words. If we are holding an apple in our hands and the person says, I swear that I am not going to have any benefit from this apple, right? We zap that apple and that apple becomes like poison to us, or it becomes like a piece of pork, right? It looks like an apple, it tastes like an apple, but we have halachically changed that reality, and that is now a piece of pork that you're holding in your hand. You can't eat it. It's not available to you anymore. So we don't appreciate the power of our words. We don't appreciate the way in which we can impact halachic realities with the things that we say. So Gary raised his hand.
Rabbi, may I ask why do we only have one opportunity to annul the vow?
Well, I don't know that we have one opportunity, but I can't remember the exact particular minutiae of how we would go about getting vows annulled, but it's highly possible that you really get one shot, because once the person in a clear state of mind accepts the limits of what they have sworn, then they have to keep to it. You know, if a person decides that they're going to swear that they're going to become a Nazir, which means that they can't cut their hair, they can't have any grape products, so that's one of the examples of a vow that the person gets locked into. If a person says that, you know, they don't state how long they are going to become a Nazir for, so the halacha talks about they have to at least go through a minimum of 30 days of this abstention. So there are realities that we create for ourselves with the things that we say, and it's taken very seriously in Jewish law. It's complicated if a person was to now take on a vow of Nazirism, because you can't do all of the sacrificial procedure that happens at the end of it, because we don't have a temple. So you know, that's just one of the examples that spring to mind, that you have to be careful. You have to be careful what you wish for, you know, careful with the things that you say, careful with the promises that we make, careful with the commitments that we are taking on. That's why there's a concept of always saying or using the phrase bli neder when you want to make a promise to someone. You know, oh, mummy, will you buy me this toy? Bli neder, I will buy you the toy. Because if you say yeah, I promise I'll buy you the toy. Well, hang on a minute. Now you promised something. Your word is your bond. You have to keep to it. And that's why we have Hatarat Nedarim before Rosh Hashanah, which is the opportunity for people to free themselves of any commitments that they may have made that they haven't kept to. And that's why we have Kol Nidre on Erev Yom Kippur as well. It's interesting, we've probably talked about this before. Kol Nidre is like, you know, one of the pinnacles of the year, one of the peaks of the year, and it's emotional and it's stirring and it gets us in the mode and the mood for teshuvah. But really all you're saying is all of the promises, all of the vows, all of the things that I've said that I shouldn't have said, they should be annulled, they should be cancelled, they should be freed, and all the rest of it. And I regret it, and if I'd have known the implication of my words, I'd have never said it. And please God, from now until next year, any promises that I make are also null and void, and free from imposing anything on me that I didn't mean to impose upon myself. That's what that means. And in, you know, the mood and the tone of it, it makes us think that we're saying, "Oh Hashem, I'm so sorry for everything that I've done." But it's actually not. It's just a statement of intent, of freeing us from vows and promises that we have made that we shouldn't have made.
Yeah, I think it's important to stress that you can't annul a promise that you made to another individual unless that individual also agrees that you don't have to carry out that promise. It's mainly between us and Hashem, isn't it? Kol Nidra, not between us and another man.
Could well be. Okay, guys, it's 1 o'clock, so we're going to bid farewell to the millions watching live on Facebook and YouTube, and wish everybody a wonderful and meaningful day, a Shabbat Shalom for when it comes, and we'll see you all very soon on Lunch and Learn.